Ebony's hands trembled as she held the crumpled $20 bill, the only payment the four men had thrown at her feet after she'd spent 3 hours cleaning their private suite. Her knees ached from scrubbing marble floors, her back screamed from lifting furniture, and her pride lay shattered on the expensive Persian rug beneath her worn sneakers. "Pick it up, sweetheart." The tallest one sneered, his Rolex catching the chandelier light. "That's more than you're worth." The other three laughed, their designer suits and entitled smirks a stark reminder of everything Ebony would never have. She'd served them drinks, cleaned their mess, endured their dismissive glances, all for a fraction of what they'd agreed to pay. "The rate was $200, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her chest. We agreed to nothing," another interrupted, already turning away. "You should be grateful we're giving you anything at all." Ebony bent down, her dark fingers reaching for the bill, when a shadow fell across the floor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The laughter died instantly. She looked up to find a man standing in the doorway, tall, imposing, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent. His grey eyes were cold as winter steel, fixed on the four men with an expression that made Ebony's breath catch. "Gentlemen," he said softly, his voice like silk over razor blades, "I believe you owe the lady an apology. And possibly much more than that. Will the mysterious stranger help Ebony get justice, or will the four rich men retaliate? What connection does this powerful man have to her situation, and why does his presence command such immediate fear? Ebony doesn't know it yet, but the man standing in that doorway is about to change her entire life. His name is whispered in the darkest corners of the city, feared by men who think themselves untouchable, respected by those who understand true power. The four men who just humiliated her are about to learn a lesson they'll never forget. But Ebony is about to discover something even more dangerous, that sometimes the most terrifying men can also be the most protective, and that the line between fear and desire is thinner than she ever imagined. What will Lucian Romano do to the men who disrespected Ebony? And more importantly, why does he care so much about a maid he's never met before? Keep watching to discover how one moment of injustice becomes the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. 6 hours earlier, Ebony Reed had started her shift at the Celestial Club with the same prayer she whispered every morning. "Please, let today be different. Let me make enough to cover rent." At 26, she'd learned that prayers rarely got answered the way you hoped, but she kept praying anyway, because hope was free, and everything else in her life cost more than she could afford. The exclusive club sat in the heart of Manhattan's financial district, a gleaming tower of glass and old money, where the annual membership fee exceeded what Ebony earned in 2 years. She worked the early shift, arriving before dawn to clean the private suites, restock the bars, and make sure every surface sparkled before the wealthy members arrived. Her supervisor, Margaret, had called her into the office that morning with an opportunity that felt too good to be true. "Suite 12 needs a deep clean," Margaret had said, sliding a work order across her desk. "4 gentlemen, high-profile investors. They've requested someone thorough and discreet. The job pays $200 cash if you can finish by noon." $200. That was Ebony's grocery budget for a month, her phone bill and utilities combined. The difference between making rent on time or begging her landlord for another extension. "I'll do it," she'd said immediately. Margaret's smile hadn't reached her eyes. "They can be particular, but you're one of our best. Just keep your head down, do the work, and collect your payment." Simple. Nothing was ever simple. Suite 12 was a sprawling luxury apartment on the club's top floor. 3 bedrooms, a full bar, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The 4 men had apparently spent the night there, and the evidence of their excess was everywhere. Empty champagne bottles, spilled cognac, cigar ash ground into the carpet, and a general disregard for the space that only came from never having to clean up after yourself. Ebony had tied her thick, natural curls into a high bun, pulled on her gloves, and gotten to work. She scrubbed bathrooms until the marble gleamed, vacuumed every inch of carpet, polished the bar until she could see her reflection in the dark wood. Her knees protested as she knelt to clean the baseboards. Her shoulders ached from reaching high shelves, but she pushed through. $200. She could do this. The men had returned around 11:30, their voices loud and entitled as they swept into the suite. Ebony had immediately moved to the corner, trying to be invisible while finishing her work. "Almost done, gentlemen," she'd said politely. "Just need to—" "You're still here?" The tallest one, sharp-featured, ice-blue eyes, a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face, looked at her like she was an insect he'd found in his salad. "We need to use the space." "Of course, I'll just finish this last—" "Now," he interrupted. "We'll call you if we need anything else." Ebony had straightened, gathering her supplies. Professional, polite, invisible. The mantra of every service worker who wanted to keep their job. "The payment," she'd said quietly. "Margaret mentioned $200 for the deep clean." The four men had exchanged glances, and something cold had slithered down Ebony's spine. She'd seen that look before, the calculation of how much they could get away with, the silent agreement to exploit someone who had no power to fight back. 200? The second man, stocky, balding, fingers like sausages wrapped around a crystal glass, laughed. "That seems excessive for basic cleaning." "That was the agreed rate," Ebony insisted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've been here since 6 this morning, and the suite required—" "You work for the club, correct?" The third man spoke up, leaning against the bar with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. "Then the club pays you. We're members here. We don't pay the help." The help. The word stung more than it should have. Ebony's fingers tightened around her supply caddy. "Margaret specifically said—" "Margaret works for us," the fourth man interrupted, pulling out his wallet with theatrical slowness. "Just like you do." He'd extracted a single $20 bill, holding it between two fingers like it was contaminated, and dropped it on the floor at Ebony's feet. "Pick it up, sweetheart. That's more than you're worth." The room had erupted in laughter, not surprise, not shock at their companion's cruelty, just laughter, like humiliating someone was the punchline to a joke only they understood. Ebony had stood there, her ebony skin flushing with heat, her pride warring with necessity. She needed that money. She needed any money. Her landlord had already sent 2 warnings. Her phone was 1 late payment from being shut off, and her mother's medication didn't pay for itself. But standing there, looking at that crumpled bill on the floor, she'd felt something crack inside her chest. "The rate was 200, she'd said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "We agreed." "We agreed to nothing," the tall one had snapped. "You should be grateful we're giving you anything at all." Ebony had bent down, her dark fingers reaching for the bill when the temperature in the room changed. She'd felt him before she'd seen him, a presence that made the air feel heavier, charged with something dangerous and electric. The laughter had died instantly, cut off like someone had severed a wire. Looking up from her crouch, Ebony had found herself staring at a pair of Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her car. Her gaze had traveled up, expensive black slacks, a crisp white shirt visible beneath a tailored suit jacket, and finally, a face that made her breath catch in her throat. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp, dangerous, mesmerizing, tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair styled back from a face all hard angles and aristocratic features. A subtle scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish edge that contrasted with the cold calculation in his grey eyes. Those eyes were currently fixed on the 4 men with an expression that Ebony couldn't quite read, but it made every instinct in her body scream danger. "Gentlemen," he'd said, his voice soft and smooth with just a hint of an Italian accent, "I believe you owe the lady an apology." The tall man had paled, actually stepping back. "Mr. Romano, this isn't— I wasn't asking for an explanation." The stranger, Romano, interrupted, still in that same quiet voice that somehow commanded absolute attention. "I was very clearly stating that you owe her an apology." Ebony had slowly stood, the $20 bill forgotten on the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the 4 powerful men who'd just humiliated her transform into nervous, stuttering boys. "We apologize," the stocky one managed. "It was a misunderstanding." "Not to me," Romano said, turning those steel-grey eyes to Ebony for the first time. The impact of his gaze hit her like a physical force. Up close, she could see flecks of silver in the grey, the precise line of his jaw, the controlled power in the way he held himself. This was a man accustomed to absolute authority, to being obeyed without question. To her, he continued, never breaking eye contact with Ebony, apologize to her. The four men who moments ago treated Ebony like dirt are now stammering apologies, their faces drained of colour and their earlier arrogance completely shattered. But who is Lucian Romano? And why does his mere presence command such immediate, terrified respect? Ebony stands frozen between the men who humiliated her and the mysterious stranger who's defending her, trying to understand why someone so clearly powerful would intervene on behalf of a maid. The way he looks at her, intense, focused, like she's the only person in the room, makes her skin tingle with awareness. She should be relieved. She should be grateful. Instead, she's confused because men like him don't help women like her without expecting something in return. The Celestial Club caters to the wealthy elite, and Ebony has learned that every kindness from that world comes with a price tag. What does Lucian Romano want? Why is he really helping her? And why do the four rich men look absolutely terrified of him? The answers are about to change everything Ebony thought she knew about power, protection, and the dangerous line between the two. Keep watching to discover what happens when a mafia boss decides you're worth protecting. The four men stumbled over each other in their haste to apologize. Ebony stood there, her cleaning supplies still clutched in one hand, watching grown men who'd treated her like garbage minutes ago now practically groveling. "We sincerely apologize, miss," the tall one said, unable to meet her eyes. It was completely inappropriate. "Unacceptable behavior," another added quickly. "The full payment, of course," the third one chimed in, pulling out his wallet with shaking hands. 200 as agreed, plus a tip for the inconvenience. The fourth man was already counting bills, his earlier smirk replaced with barely concealed panic. Lucian Romano hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a single threat. He simply stood there with one hand in his pocket, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone observing insects scurry. When Ebony's palm was full of crisp $100 bills, 6 of them, 3 times what she'd been promised, Romano finally spoke. "Leave." The four men didn't need to be told twice. They practically ran for the door, abandoning their belongings, their drinks, their dignity. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly Ebony was alone with the most intimidating man she'd ever encountered. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Ebony's fingers trembled slightly as she tucked the money into her pocket, hyper-aware of Romano's presence, of the way he seemed to fill the enormous suite with quiet authority. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "You didn't have to—" "They disrespected you," he interrupted, turning those grey eyes back to her. "In my club." Ebony blinked. "Your club?" The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I own 70% of the Celestial. The previous owner decided to accept my partnership offer rather enthusiastically after certain complications arose with his business model." The way he said complications made Ebony's pulse quicken. This man wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous, the kind of dangerous that made other dangerous men run. "I should get back to work," Ebony said, moving to collect her supplies. "Thank you again for— What's your name?" She paused, her hand hovering over the vacuum cord. Every instinct told her to lie, to protect herself, to maintain the invisibility that had kept her safe in a world that rarely noticed women like her. But those grey eyes were waiting, patient and piercing, and somehow Ebony knew he'd see through any deception. "Ebony Reed." "Ebony," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his voice, slightly accented, deliberate, like he was tasting it, made warmth pool in her stomach. "Beautiful name. It suits you." She straightened, meeting his gaze despite the nervous energy humming through her veins. "Mr. Romano—" "Lucian," he corrected. "Or Luca, if you prefer." "Mr. Romano," she insisted, needing the formality as a barrier between them. "I appreciate your help, but I really should— How long have you worked here, Ebony?" The question threw her. 8 months. And before that? Does it matter? "Everything about you matters," he said simply, as if it were an obvious fact rather than the most intense thing anyone had ever said to her. Ebony's breath caught. She'd dealt with wealthy men before, men who looked through her, men who looked at her like she was an object, men who treated her like wallpaper. But Lucian Romano looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve, a code he wanted to crack. It was terrifying, and thrilling, and completely inappropriate, given that he was clearly some kind of crime lord, and she was a maid who just wanted to pay her bills and survive. "I appreciate the intervention," Ebony said firmly, gathering her supplies, "but I need to finish my shift. Thank you for— I'd like to offer you a job." She froze. "Excuse me?" Lucian moved to the bar, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey with the ease of someone completely comfortable in the space. "Not as a maid, as my personal assistant." Ebony stared at him. "I don't understand." "It's quite simple," he said, turning to face her with the glass in his hand. "I need someone I can trust. Someone observant, discreet, and not easily intimidated. You just demonstrated all 3 qualities. By cleaning a suite. By standing up for yourself against 4 men who could have made your life very difficult. By staying professional when they humiliated you. By not running when I walked in." He took a sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. "Most people run when they realize who I am. And who are you?" The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. Lucian's smile was sharp enough to cut. Someone who keeps his friends close and his enemies closer. Someone who values loyalty above everything else. Someone who always pays his debts and always collects what he's owed. He set down his glass. "I'm offering you a salary of $5,000 a week, full benefits and protection." Ebony's mind stuttered over the number. $5,000 a week. That was more than she made in 3 months at the club. Protection from what? "From men like the ones who just left," Lucian said quietly. "From anyone who might think you're an easy target because of how you look, where you work, or how much power they have. You'd be under my employ. That means you're under my protection." It was too good to be true. Every cell in Ebony's body screamed warning. This was a trap, a trick, a debt she'd never be able to repay. "What would you want in return?" Lucian tilted his head, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Your time, your discretion, your honesty. Nothing more, nothing less." "I don't believe you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ebony's hand flew to her mouth, horrified at her own boldness, but Lucian laughed, a genuine warm sound that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "Smart woman," he said with approval. "You're right to be suspicious, but I'm giving you my word, which, in my world, is the most valuable thing I possess. You work for me, you follow my instructions, you maintain confidentiality. In return, I compensate you generously and ensure no one ever treats you the way those men did again." Ebony's mind raced. $5,000 a week would change everything. She could pay off her debts, help her mother with medical bills, move out of her crumbling apartment, stop living paycheck to paycheck. But this man was dangerous. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way other powerful men feared him to the controlled violence she sensed beneath his polished exterior. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." Lucian reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. "My private number. Call me when you decide." Their fingers brushed as she took the card, and Ebony felt electricity shoot up her arm. Lucian's eyes darkened, like he'd felt it too. "One more thing, Ebony," he said as she turned to leave. "Those men, they won't bother you again. But if anyone else does, anyone at all, you call me immediately. Understood?" She should say no, she should run. She should forget this entire encounter. Instead, she nodded. $5,000 a week. Protection from a man who makes millionaires tremble. A way out of the poverty and struggle that's defined Ebony's entire adult life. It sounds like a dream, or a deal with the devil. Lucian Romano's offer is everything Ebony needs, and everything she should fear. She's seen enough to know that men like him don't make charitable offers to maids they've just met. There's always an agenda, always a price beyond what's stated in the contract. But there's something in the way he looked at her, not through her like most wealthy men do, not at her like she's an object. but at her like she's a person worth seeing, worth protecting, worth remembering. It's been so long since anyone looked at Ebony that way that she's almost forgotten what it feels like to be truly seen. The business card in her pocket feels like it's burning through the fabric. His private number, a direct line to one of the most powerful men in the city. Will Ebony make the call that changes her life forever? Or will fear keep her trapped in the struggle she knows? The answer comes sooner than she expects. Ebony didn't call. For 3 days she carried Lucian Romano's business card in her pocket like a talisman, pulling it out during her lunch breaks, studying the embossed lettering while her co-workers chattered around her. She'd find herself staring at her phone at 2 in the morning, his number pulled up on the screen, her thumb hovering over the call button. But she never pressed it. Fear held her back, not of Lucian himself, but of what accepting his offer would mean. She'd spent her entire life being invisible, keeping her head down, surviving through a combination of hard work and learned helplessness. Men like Lucian Romano existed in a different stratosphere, played by different rules, and Ebony knew that entering his world would change her in ways she couldn't predict. On the 4th day, her landlord knocked on her apartment door with an eviction notice. "I've been patient, Ebony," Mr. Chen said, his expression apologetic but firm. "But I have a waiting list of people who can pay on time. You've got 2 weeks, then I need the apartment. 2 weeks, 14 days to come up with 3 months of back rent, plus next month's payment, or she'd be homeless." That night, Ebony sat in her tiny studio apartment, water-stained ceiling, peeling linoleum, the constant drip of the leaky faucet she'd reported 6 times, and finally admitted the truth. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She dialed Lucian's number before she could change her mind. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Ebony." Not a question. He'd been waiting for her call. "I'd like to discuss the position," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "If the offer still stands, meet me tomorrow noon. I'll send a car to your address. How do you know where I make it my business to know everything about the people I'm interested in," Lucian said smoothly. "Sleep well, Ebony. Tomorrow changes everything." He hung up before she could respond. The car that arrived at 11:30 the next morning was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, and a driver in a tailored suit who called her Miss Reed and opened the door like she was royalty instead of a broke maid from Queens. The interior smelled like leather and money. Ebony sat ramrod straight in the back seat, acutely aware of her discount store dress and worn shoes, trying not to touch anything expensive. They didn't go to the Celestial Club. Instead, the SUV pulled up to a towering glass building in Midtown, its lobby all marble and modern art. Security guards nodded respectfully as Ebony's driver escorted her to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse office that belonged in an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city sprawling below like Lucian Romano owned it all. He stood at the window with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. He wore another impeccable suit, charcoal grey this time, and Ebony used the moment to steady her nerves, to remind herself that she was here for survival, not whatever else her traitorous body seemed to think when looking at him. Lucian ended his call and turned, and the intensity of his focus made Ebony's breath catch all over again. "You came," he said, something like satisfaction warming his voice. "You knew I would. I hoped you would. There's a difference." He gestured to the leather chairs arranged around a coffee table. "Please, sit." Ebony perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment's contents combined. Lucian sat across from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that made her want to lean closer. "Before we discuss terms," he said, "I need complete honesty from you. Can you give me that?" "I can try." His mouth quirked. "That's honest enough. Why did you wait 3 days to call?" The question caught her off guard. Ebony had expected to discuss salary, responsibilities, schedules, not her internal struggle. "Because I don't understand why you're doing this," she admitted. "Men like you don't help women like me without expecting something." "Men like me," Lucian repeated thoughtfully. "What kind of man do you think I am, Ebony?" "Dangerous," she said without hesitation. Powerful, used to getting what you want, probably not entirely legal in how you get it. Instead of being offended, Lucian smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less intimidating, devastatingly attractive. All accurate, he confirmed. I am dangerous, particularly to people who threaten what's mine. I am powerful because I've built an empire from nothing and I protect it ruthlessly. And you're correct. My business interests exist in several grey areas of the law. The casual admission should have sent Ebony running. Instead, she found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by his brutal honesty. So what do you want from me? Lucian was silent for a long moment, those grey eyes searching her face like he was reading a language only he understood. The truth. I don't entirely know yet, he said finally. When I saw those men treating you like you were worthless, something in me. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've built my reputation on control, on calculated decisions and strategic moves. But watching you stand there with your dignity intact while they tried to break you, it wasn't strategic to intervene. It was necessary. Ebony's heart hammered against her ribs. I still don't understand. Neither do I, Lucian admitted, and the vulnerability in that confession was somehow more intimate than if he'd touched her. But I'd like the opportunity to figure it out. So here's what I'm offering. Work for me. Handle my schedule, manage my appointments, interface with people I don't have time or patience for. In return, I pay you well, ensure your safety, and ask only for your discretion and loyalty. And if I find out you're asking me to do something illegal, then you walk away, he said simply. I won't force you to compromise your morals, Ebony. That's a promise. She studied him, trying to find the lie, the manipulation, the trap. But all she saw was a powerful man offering her a lifeline and asking nothing in return except her time and trust. It was still probably a terrible idea. Lucian Romano was definitely involved in criminal activity, definitely dangerous, definitely the kind of man her mother would tell her to run from. But her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Her landlord wouldn't accept pride as payment. And something in Ebony's gut, the same instinct that had kept her alive this long, told her that Lucian Romano, for all his danger, wouldn't hurt her. 5,000 a week, she said. Benefits. And I need an advance to cover back rent. Lucian pulled out a checkbook, an actual checkbook, like some kind of movie character, and began writing. How much do you need? 4,500. He didn't even blink, just tore off the check and slid it across the table. Ebony looked down at it, and her vision blurred slightly. $10,000. The extra is for anything else you might need, Lucian said quietly. Consider it a signing bonus. Ebony looked up at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who was handing her more money than she'd seen in her entire life, and made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. When do I start? Ebony Reed just accepted a job from one of the most dangerous men in New York City. In the span of a week, she's gone from struggling to pay rent to holding a $10,000 check and the promise of a salary that will transform her life. But working for Lucian Romano means entering a world where power is currency, loyalty is everything, and violence lurks beneath every polished surface. She'll have access to his schedule, his contacts, his secrets, the kind of information that could get her killed if it falls into the wrong hands. And there's something else, something neither of them is ready to acknowledge. The electric attraction that crackles between them every time their eyes meet, the awareness that turns professional conversations into something far more dangerous than any business deal. Lucian promised to protect her. But who will protect Ebony from Lucian himself? From the way he looks at her like she's something precious, from the realization that she's starting to look at him the same way. The 4 men who humiliated her were just the beginning. Now Ebony is about to discover what it really means to be under the protection and attention of a mafia boss. And nothing will ever be the same again. Ebony's first day working for Lucian Romano started with a $1,700 wardrobe delivery to her apartment. You represent me now, he'd explained over the phone that morning, his voice still rough with sleep in a way that made her stomach flip. You need to look the part. The clothes were beautiful, tailored dresses, elegant blouses, Professional slacks in fabrics Ebony had only seen in department store windows. Everything fit perfectly, because of course Lucien had somehow determined her exact measurements. She should have been creeped out. Instead, she felt seen, cared for, like someone had finally noticed she existed and decided she deserved nice things. Her new office was adjacent to Lucien's, connected by a door that stayed open so he could call her in whenever needed. The space was 3 times the size of her apartment, with a view of the city, a computer system that looked like it belonged in NASA, and a salary that made her want to cry every time she thought about it. The work itself was surprisingly normal. She managed Lucien's calendar, screened his calls, coordinated meetings with various business associates, who all seemed to speak in careful euphemisms. She quickly learned that discussing logistics meant planning something probably illegal, handling a situation meant someone was about to have a very bad day, and settling accounts meant someone owed Lucien money they were going to pay one way or another. It should have bothered her more. But after years of being invisible, of being treated like she didn't matter, there was something intoxicating about being essential to someone so powerful. 2 weeks into her new position, Ebony was organizing files when she came across 4 familiar names, the men from the Celestial Club. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the file. Inside were detailed reports, business holdings, financial statements, personal information, and a list of debts owed to various Romano enterprises. The numbers made her head spin. Find something interesting? Ebony jumped, spinning to find Lucien leaning against the doorframe of his office, watching her with those penetrating grey eyes. I didn't mean to snoop, she said quickly. I was just organizing and— Ebony. He crossed to her desk in 3 long strides. You work for me. Nothing in this office is off limits to you. He reached past her, close enough that she could feel his body heat, smell his cologne, and tapped the open file. Those 4 men, he said quietly, have been embezzling from their investors for 3 years. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but adding up to several $1 million. They've also been using my club to conduct their business without paying the appropriate fees. Ebony's breath caught. What are you going to do? Lucien's smile was cold enough to frost glass. I've already done it. Their assets are currently being seized by federal investigators who received an anonymous tip, complete with irrefutable evidence. By tomorrow, they'll be arrested. By next month, they'll be in prison. You turn them in to the police. I have a complicated relationship with law enforcement, Lucien said, something like amusement warming his voice. But occasionally, our interests align. Those men committed actual crimes, fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They deserve actual prison, not just my personal brand of justice. Ebony stared at him. This dangerous man who just casually destroyed 4 people's lives as easily as someone might swat a fly. Because of what they did to me, she whispered. Lucien's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Because of what they did to you, he confirmed. And because they thought they could get away with it. No one disrespects what's mine, Ebony. No one. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly, made her skin feel too tight, made her want to lean into his touch and see what would happen. I'm not yours, she managed, but her voice came out breathy, unconvincing. Aren't you? Lucien's thumb brushed her cheek, barely a touch, but it felt like fire. You wear clothes I bought. You work in an office I provided. You're under my protection. Bear my name professionally. Spend more time with me than anyone else in your life. Each word felt like a step closer to some invisible line they'd been dancing around since the moment they met. That's employment, Ebony whispered. Not ownership. You're right, Lucien said, dropping his hand and stepping back, leaving her cold with the loss of his proximity. I apologize. That was inappropriate. But his eyes told a different story. They said he wasn't sorry at all, that he meant every word, that the only thing he regretted was backing off. Ebony's phone buzzed, shattering the tension. She glanced at the screen and her blood ran cold. Her mother's nursing facility. They only called for emergencies. I have to, she started, but Lucien was already moving. Take it. Use my office if you need privacy." Ebony answered as she stumbled into Lucian's private space, her heart in her throat. "Hello? Miss Reed, this is Nurse Patterson. Your mother had an incident this morning. She's stable now, but we need to discuss her care plan. The medication we've been using isn't covered by her current insurance, and the out-of-pocket cost—" "How much?" Ebony interrupted. $1,500 a month, plus the increased care level she needs now is another $2,000. "I'll pay it," Ebony said immediately. $3,500 a month was still less than 1 week of her new salary. Whatever she needs, money isn't an issue anymore. The words felt surreal in her mouth. Money isn't an issue. When had she ever been able to say that? "That's wonderful, Miss Reed. I'll send over the updated care forms and—" "Whatever she needs," Ebony repeated firmly. "The best medications, the best care, whatever makes her comfortable. Send me the bills." When she hung up, she found Lucian standing at his window, hands in his pockets, giving her the illusion of privacy, while clearly waiting to make sure she was okay. "Everything all right?" he asked without turning. "My mother has Parkinson's," Ebony heard herself say. "She's in a care facility in Queens. I couldn't afford the better medications before, but now—" She stopped, emotion clogging her throat. For 3 years, she'd watched her mother deteriorate, knowing there were treatments that could help, but being powerless to provide them. And now, because of this man and his dangerous generosity, she could. Lucian turned to face her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. He looked at her like she was brave instead of just desperate, strong instead of just surviving. "Take tomorrow off," he said quietly. "Visit your mother. Make sure she has everything she needs. If the facility gives you any problems about payment or care, let me know." "Lucian." "Family is everything, Ebony," he interrupted. And there was a weight to those words that suggested painful personal history. "You take care of yours. That's not negotiable." Ebony crossed the space between them before her brain caught up to her body. She meant to just thank him, to maintain professional distance, to remember all the reasons why getting close to Lucian Romano was a terrible idea. Instead, she reached up and kissed his cheek. It was just a brush of lips against skin, barely a touch, over before it really began. But Lucian went completely still, his sharp intake of breath audible in the quiet office. When Ebony pulled back, his eyes were molten silver, intense enough to burn. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Lucian's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the barely controlled tension in his body. "Ebony," he said, and her name in his voice was a prayer and a warning and a promise all at once. "You're making this very difficult." "Making what difficult?" "Keeping my distance, maintaining professional boundaries, pretending I don't want—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "You should go. Before I forget every rule I've set for myself." But neither of them moved. They stood there inches apart, the air between them crackling with everything unsaid. "What if I don't want you to keep your distance?" The words escaped before Ebony could stop them, reckless and honest and terrifying. Lucian's eyes darkened. His thumb traced her cheekbone, slow and deliberate. "Then we're both in trouble," he murmured. "Because I've spent 2 weeks trying not to fall for you, Ebony Reed, and I'm failing. Spectacularly." Ebony stood at the window of Lucian's penthouse, their penthouse now, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The city glittered below, full of possibility and promise, so different from the view she'd had just 6 months ago. "Your mother called," Lucian said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "She wants to know if we're coming to Sunday dinner." Ebony leaned back into his embrace, still marveling at how natural this felt, how right. "You know she just wants to feed you. She thinks you're too skinny." Lucian's laugh rumbled through his chest into her back. "Your mother is the only person in New York who thinks I need fattening up." They'd taken it slow, despite the intensity of that first almost kiss in his office. Dates, conversations, the gradual building of trust between two people from different worlds, learning to meet in the middle. Lucian had introduced her to his legitimate business holdings, his philanthropic work, the parts of his life that didn't involve danger and darkness. And Ebony had introduced him to Sunday dinners with her mother, to laughter and warmth, and the kind of family he'd never had. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to face him. Lucian's smile was soft, genuine, completely unguarded, an expression he reserved only for her. "I know," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "You saved me, too." And in the fading light of the New York sunset, with the man who'd protected her wrapped around her like a shield, Ebony Reed finally understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. Not despite who she was, but because of it.